Hello students, welcome to the course on Statistical Methods for Psychological Research 2. Now we are going to learn hypothesis testing about a single mean and calculation. Let us look at the contents at a glance. Research hypothesis, point prevalence hypothesis, steps in testing the hypothesis under point prevalence situations, single sample or one sample parametric test procedure using mean as test statistic. Test procedure in the case of large and small samples. Expected outputs are given under learning objectives. After completion of this module, students will be able to understand the notion of point prevalence hypothesis and research hypothesis. Construct a suitable test procedure to deal with point prevalence and statistical hypothesis situation. Able to do one sample parametric test under large and small sample problem. Let us see the overview on testing the hypothesis with single mean in both large and small sample tests. In the overview, we will see research hypothesis, point prevalence research hypothesis, procedure of testing a point prevalence research hypothesis with a single mean, and also the cases when the population standard deviation is known or unknown. Now, for this, let us recall what we have studied earlier. Now, the figure will clearly give you an idea what are the things we have to learn. First of all, we are concerned about the population. To study the population characteristic, what we do is we are selecting a sample from that population. From the sample, we calculate statistic, and using the statistic, we study the characteristics of the population through parameters. Therefore, this is the way inference is approaching, and in statistical inference, we study the characteristics of population using the sample information. Under this context, we need certain terminologies. The first one is parameters. The statistical constants obtained from the population are called parameters. They are usually denoted by Greek letters mu, sigma, rho, etc. The meaning of statistic. The word statistic means the constants obtained from the sample are called statistic. They are denoted by English lowercase letters. Now, next term we have to see is research hypothesis. A hypothesis or research hypothesis is defined as a tentative statement on the population or the values of the parameters associated with the respective probability distribution. Here the important point is it is only a tentative statement. Therefore, a statement is made about the population characteristics. That statement may be true or acceptable or rejectable, and therefore, that statement we have to test. The student need to understand that hypothesis is not an assumption, it is only a tentative statement. For example, the cell phone usage affects the academic performance. Now, this is a tentative statement. This statement is true or false. This is the question before us, and for that we have to go form a research hypothesis. This research hypothesis is to be tested for their validity or acceptability using statistical concepts and a representative sample from the population. Caution: this research hypothesis is not a thing to be proved. Instead, in order to prove this, we need two more hypotheses, namely null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis in testing procedure. Therefore, the scholar must clearly understand in his research he will come across three hypotheses. One hypothesis is research hypothesis, number 2 is null hypothesis, and the third one is alternative hypothesis. Now, how we are making decision whether to accept or reject the hypothesis? Logic for decision making. We always study the population characteristics. Due to various reasons, we select a sample of size n from the population of size capital N. If the sample information provided by the sample supports the hypothesis, the null hypothesis is not rejected. On the other hand, if the sample information goes against or does not support the null hypothesis, then it is rejected. So, the question before the researcher is whether to reject or not to reject the null hypothesis. For this purpose, we are having two approaches. In the approach 1, we are assigning a value to the parameter and testing whether the sample observations collected from that population support the hypothesis. Another situation are, in the approach 2, we are providing the population mean and sample mean with their standard deviation and testing whether the sample has come from the given population. Remark: the type of research hypothesis which prevails in such a situation is called the hypothesis of point prevalence. That is, there are so many types of hypothesis in research. One is point prevalence hypothesis, hypothesis of difference, hypothesis of no difference, and relationship hypothesis, and therefore, this is a particular case of a research hypothesis. And here what we are doing is we are assigning a value to the parameter, and this value may be from our intuition or from prior knowledge or from experience. In statistics, here we are using either average or proportion or percentages. In this module, the measure mean is considered. Example, now look at the example. What is the average performance level of your class? Now, here underline the word average performance. Therefore, here we are using the average performance, which is nothing but mean level. Therefore, here we are using the mean. One more example is given here. Can we take the average height? Because we cannot measure all the Indians' height, all the people of India's height, and can we assume that, or can we take it as 165 centimeter? This is a question mark. Therefore, this is called point prevalence. That is, we are assigning a value to the average height of Indian. Average height of Indian is parameter, and we are assigning the value 165, and we are testing whether we can accept it or we have to reject it. In this context, the test suitable is one sample mean test. What is statistical test? A statistical test is a procedure governed by certain rules which helps to decide whether to reject or not to reject the hypothesis based on sample information. This procedure is called statistical hypothesis testing. Therefore, in the hypothesis test, what we do is we are having a hypothesis, and whether to accept or reject the hypothesis, that is the question to be answered, and for that we are having certain rules, and those rules we have to make use it, and ultimately we have to the conclusion that whether to accept or not. This statistical hypothesis plays an important role in almost all fields such as industry, biological sciences, behavioral sciences, economics, and etc. Template for testing a hypothesis. The first step is null hypothesis, which is denoted by H0, and alternative hypothesis, which is denoted by H1, or some books they are using HA. In step 2, we have to fix the level of significance, and that is denoted by alpha percentage. It is expressed in percentage. It may be 5% or 1%. In step 3, several tests are available. Among them, we have to select a test which is suitable for a specific purpose. In step 4, we have to find out a critical value from the computer output. This critical value may be a table value or a p-value. Now, a student must understand this idea of critical value. I will give a good example for critical value. The passing minimum of PG is 50 marks. Therefore, here 50 marks divide into two regions. One is pass region and another one is fail region. If a student get less than 50, then he belongs to fail region. If a student get more than 50, then he belongs to pass region. Similarly, in statistics also, we are having the critical value. Critical value is just like a cutoff value. If the value lies below the critical value, the null hypothesis is accepted, and if it is above the critical value, then the null hypothesis is rejected. In step 5, making inference. This inference must be presented in an APA format. APA stands for American Psychologist Association. With the advent of computers, certain probabilities can be readily computed and used to make decisions in hypothesis test. One such probability value is the p-value. Therefore, now we have to see how the p-value is useful in accepting or rejecting a null hypothesis. The decision rule is if p-value is less than alpha, rejects the null hypothesis. On the other hand, if p-value is greater than or equal to alpha, do not reject the null hypothesis. As a researcher, you have to follow the following steps without fail. Step 1, it is imperative, that is necessary to write the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. And in step 2, the researcher must fix the level of significance. It may be any level, but normally we fix either 5% or 1%. In step 3, with the domain knowledge of statistics, we have to select the appropriate test, that is proper test must be selected among the several tests. In the step 4, you have to go for any software, and with the help of that you have to calculate the critical value or p-value. Step 5, make inference based on the decision rule. Therefore, any researchers who is solving the problem must strictly follow these 5 steps in the logical order. Single sample mean test. Now, I will provide an example for single sample mean test. Now, here you look the problem. From a large population, we are selecting the heights of 12 males. Those values are given as 165, 168, etc., and finally 172. Now, the question is, based on this information, can we take the average height of the population as 173? Therefore, here we are assigning a value to the population parameter average, that is population average equal to 173 centimeter, or can we take the average height as 173 centimeter. In this example, we have selected a sample of 10 plants and measured the heights, and from the heights values we calculated the mean average 69.6 centimeter. The question before the researcher is whether he can take the 69.6 centimeter height as the height of all the plants. That is the question, and for that we are taking only one sample, and also we are using mean, and hence we have to make use of single sample mean test. Revisit. First, you have to look at the purpose. For example, to test whether the assigned or proposed mean value can be taken as the population parameter. Therefore, this is the purpose I want to know, and for that I have to choose the parameter mean. Appropriate test for this given situation is single sample mean test, because we take only one sample and for testing purpose we are using mean, and therefore it is single sample mean test. Let us summarize what we have learned in this video. They are research hypothesis, point prevalence research hypothesis, single mean test, its procedure, and also discussion on how to solve a single mean test problem. Let us meet in the next video. Thank you.